Hey, DawgNation, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Really excited about having you with us today and really looking forward to this final show of the week, getting ready for Tennessee on Saturday, a game that I think some excitement's been building for here around DawgNation. It's weird, I would say, to be this big a favorite over Tennessee, but nonetheless, I think there are a lot of Georgia fans looking forward to maybe another blowout against the Vols, much like the 41-0 score from a year ago. And also some interesting subplots in this game from the Georgia side. There's a lot of recruiting storylines here, which we'll cover with Jeff Sindell a little bit later on. And, oh, yeah, before I forget, our buddy Cameron Nizilik, who you've become a huge fan of, you've come to know him and love him from our Northside Hospital postgame show, he is going to be with us as a special guest here today as well. So we are fully loaded and glad you're with us. As DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, begins right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So the more I think about Georgia-Tennessee on Saturday, the more I come to the realization that there is one thing I'm looking to see more of, probably than anything else from Georgia on Saturday. My number one curiosity heading into the game is, can we finally see some more explosive plays from the Georgia running game? And I think I'm going to write about this later on today at DawgNation.com as a part of my By the Numbers piece. But I wanted to at least start the conversation here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, by saying that that is something I'd like to see, and in particular, where I think it needs to come from is by that big performance by DeAndre Swift, one of those guys who's still listed among the, I don't want to say favorites for the Heisman Trophy, but he's one of the guys that you can bet on right now, which certainly means that he's near the forefront of the national conversation. And yet, for even Swift in his own words, who you'll hear from in just a moment, maybe it hasn't quite been the breakthrough performances here through 4 games that he was hoping for. Maybe that changes on Saturday against Tennessee in front of a packed house at Sanford Stadium. Georgia fans who show up looking for something to cheer for. Maybe Swift will give those Dog fans something to cheer for. And many of you kind of know the backstory on this and kind of where this has been, the curiosity around all of this. Let's go back to the Middle Tennessee State game, after which Swift didn't really play a lot. Had some carries early, then did not take many carries after that. A lot of Georgia fans were tweeting at me at DawgNation Daily, putting some questions in our forum at forum.dawgnation.com, wondering, where was DeAndre Swift? Why wasn't Swift used more? And the confusion about all this did not really get cleared up after the game very much because Kirby Smart tried to play coy about the entire thing and tried to pretend that there was nothing going on from an injury standpoint with Swift. Here's what Kirby Smart said then.
Coach DeAndre Swift didn't play a whole lot after early season. Is that injury or just coach's decision?
No, I thought DeAndre played the first drive. He had the first 2 or 3 carries. I mean, we rotated pretty much after that, and then once we felt like the game was in hand, we were going to play some of those other guys who hadn't had as many carries.
Georgia fans love Smart, so they want to be careful how they say this, but to put it kindly, it strains the imagination to think that Smart's assessment of the DeAndre Swift situation there is exactly the way that he described it, and I think most Georgia fans were, worried about what it might mean for Swift the rest of the way. Missouri last week, probably still not that breakout that people were looking for from him, and when Swift met with reporters this week, he did admit that when it comes to nagging growing injury, that he has been seeking some extra help for that, spending some time in the training room, and admitted in the midst of this conversation with the reporters that he's looking to try to take care of his body so he can break out in a big way, the way that so many Georgia fans are waiting to see him do. Here is Swift in his own words about everything that's been going on with him.
Definitely getting in the treatment room, making sure I'm healthy, because I know I'm going to get more of them carries I did than last year. So just making sure I'm ready, healthy physically. So.
Are you a little more sore after practices, after games than you used to be?
Because my workload is more this year than last year, so that comes with it.
Are you itching to kind of break a big one this season so far?
Yeah, I'm looking for that breakout game. It'll come. I'm not really trying to press it, but it'll come.
First of all, a couple things here. Let me correct myself on something before I get a bunch of comments about this. I am notorious for mispronouncing the body part that I just described a moment ago. For some reason, I always want to call it a groin, but I guess it's groin. I always say the wrong word there. I know people are going to give me grief about that, so let me correct myself before we get there. Groin issue, not groin, groin. I don't know why that's always such a problem for me. But on a more serious note, I think you do love the idea of the patience that Swift is showing. I mean, patience is a good characteristic for running back anyway, given the fact that they have to wait for holes to open, wait for their time to burst through, and that same patience that Swift and other great running backs show on the field, he's showing right there with his own words off the field as well, that he knows that big moment's going to come for him. He doesn't need to press. He doesn't need to worry too much about that. He just needs to sort of stay in his own mindset here, and it's all going to kind of play out the way that it needs to play out. I think if you're a Georgia fan, you appreciate the fact that Swift, to use a phrase that we use in sports a lot, is not pressing very much right now. He's not getting too worried about the fact that it's maybe a little slower start to his season than some Dog fans would hope for. And the fact that he's seeking the extra treatment or whatever is going on there, I guess is also a good thing as well. And it is a legitimate concern when you go from being the number 3 running back a year ago to what's supposed to be the number 1 running back here in 2018. That is a different kind of taxation on your body. There's some wear and tear associated with that. That just does not happen when you're the change of pace back there on as a freshman, as a number 3 running back. It's a little bit like what DeAndre Walker's also dealing with on the defensive side of the ball. Now, so far, Walker is sort of passing that test with flying colors here. He's in the backfield. He's generating sacks. He's picking up where he left off in that limited specialist role a year ago. And now DeAndre Swift, the other DeAndre, or one of the other DeAndres on the Georgia roster, will try to do the same thing on offense. I thought that Kirby Smart, when he spoke about Swift this week, again, also kind of gave a hopeful assessment here, acknowledging the fact that, you know what, Swift is trying to take on a larger role here for UGA, but Smart has not wavered in his belief that he thinks that Swift is ultimately going to be up to the challenge. Here's more from Kirby.
He's much more explosive. I think he's taking much more reps because of the other 2 backs being gone. I think he was a change-up guy previously because he was the other guy coming in. Now he's, trying to be the guy, and he's having to carry the ball more. I think he's in good shape, pushes himself hard. Very pleased with his ability to protect and catch the ball in the backfield, and he's working really hard. All those backs, guys, they deserve a lot of credit because those 4 guys do a lot of work, with Prather being the 5th, who carries a large workload in practice and helps a lot in special teams. I think all those guys deserve a lot of credit.
I think Kirby's right. There is some credit to be given out to the entire committee of Georgia running backs here that involves Elijah Holyfield, who looked good last week against Missouri. Certainly ran hard all season long. Brian Harrion, too. And you want to mention, Prather Hudson in that mix. And at some point in time, we'll probably see even more of James Cook. Only had the 1 reception a week ago. But from that group, a star has to emerge. A true leader of the pack has to emerge. Georgia was lucky last year to have 2 of those guys with Chubb and Michelle. At least one of those guys has to be that guy here this year. And you heard Kirby Smart sort of use that phrase, that Swift's trying to be that guy for Georgia. And I think back to some of the stuff that I said earlier in the week about when I look at the Georgia offense right now, the only, I guess, point that seems to come to mind for me is, in some respects, it just doesn't look as easy as I thought it would. Georgia's scoring plenty of points, but it's just not quite been as easy yet as I think as a fan I hoped it probably would be. And maybe it's the whatever's going on with Swift, whether it be kind of getting used to a new role in sort of a bigger starring environment, whether it be nagging injury that he's dealing with, whatever. Maybe that's the missing piece here. Maybe this week he really breaks out in a big way to show what Georgia can really look like as an offense when it's really firing on all cylinders there. Certainly Georgia needs that to happen, and this week may be the week that it actually does. One more point here before we move on. Another thing about Saturday that's going to be incredibly fun, 3:30 on CBS, maybe not quite as hot as it's been for the first couple of home games. I just think it stands to be an incredible environment. I hope that fans that show up do show up ready to make a lot of noise, and by the time the 4th quarter starts, hopefully it'll be dark enough to do the Light Up Sanford when the Krypton theme plays from the Redcoat Band. Hopefully all that'll kind of just fall into place and just be the great environment you've come to expect from Sanford Stadium, because not only is that just fun for the other fans to experience together, it's also important, I think, for the recruits who are making their way in. We're going to talk more to Jeff Santel about this later on. He's been filling up the forum at forum.DawgNation.com about all the big visitors that are going to be there. Big names like John Emery Jr. expected to be there. But in addition to that, the 4-star safety from Trinity High School there in Texas, Lewis Seen's also taking his official visit as well. Now, I don't know that Seen leaves this official committing to Georgia. It sounds like he's got some other visits that he wants to take, but it will continue a pattern for him of being blown away by the experiences that he's had when he's come on campus. He was here for G-Day, loved that. He was one of the guys at the reveal when the West End Zone facility was open. He loved that, and as Seen explained to Jeff Santel this week, and we played this for you on Before the Hedges on Wednesday, the more and more this stuff goes down, the better Seen seems to like Georgia. If you're a Georgia fan hoping Seen comes to UGA, certainly this clip will make you more optimistic about that possibility.
Would you say your first visit to Georgia was better, or your second visit, or were those about equal?
I would say as more as I go there, it just keeps getting better.
just keeps getting better and better. That's what Scene says there, which sets the stage for what's going to happen on Saturday with his official visit. And one of the things that makes the official visit for Scene even more interesting here is the presence of Ryan Trouble Davis. Now, you know Davis is a linebacker commit to Georgia's class. He's taking an unofficial visit on Saturday. First of all, Davis likes being in Athens, likes the game day environment. But in particular, Davis wants to make sure that Scene has a good time on his official visit. Now, Davis is an incredible football player, but apparently also an incredible eye for talent as well, because he's seen a lot from Scene that he really likes, wants to make sure that Scene takes that next step towards maybe also being a member of this 2019 class there for Georgia. You love the idea of these two guys maybe one day teaming up together on the field, but also teaming up for this particular visit here makes you feel better about the hospitality that Scene's going to receive. Here's more from Lewis on that point.
That's got to be good, right? A guy that's like, I'm going to come up to make sure he has a good time because I want to play with that guy. That's got to be a good feeling, right?
Yeah, of course. That's a great feeling because he knows what I can do and I know what he can do. That dude has a motor. He's a guy that I would actually see myself playing with, want to play with.
So listen, I'll tell you this. I mean, when you think about that long, distinguished list of visitors that includes Scene, Ryan Davis, John Emery Jr., Jaden Hayeswood, I think, expected to be in the building. When you start thinking about all of this, it just sets the stage for Saturday to be a very big day for Georgia. On the recruiting front, laying some more foundation for that 2019 class, and on the field as well, putting DeAndre Swift on display, putting some of these other weapons on display. As Georgia takes that next step towards remaining undefeated and setting itself up for an incredibly fun stretch run. I cannot wait to be with all of you in Athens tomorrow. My name is Brandon Adams. It's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Good to have you with us live on video, 10 a.m. on the DawgNation Facebook, DawgNation YouTube feed, DawgNation Twitter feed, however you get to us. We're glad to have you with us here on the program today. Also available on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and in podcast form wherever podcasts can be found, the Apple Podcast Player, Google Podcast Player, the world-famous DawgNation.com. Pretty much everywhere you find podcasts, you can find DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. And speaking of Marco's Pizza, woke up early this morning watching the Ryder Cup. Many of you were doing that as well. I don't know that Marco's Pizza is open for delivery that early in the morning, but you know what? Maybe you get some the night before, you put it in the refrigerator, and you have yourself a little snack as you're watching that here this morning, or maybe staying home from work today and doing that, whatever you want to do. It is fantastic stuff, and it's at a great everyday low price of 2 medium, 2 topping pizzas for $6.99 each. I'm talking about authentic Italian quality pizza made from the Gianmarco family recipe there in the sauce. Owner of the, right there from Italy, bringing that great taste here to the United States. It is awesome, and you'll love it as well. Go to Marcos.com. You can find out where the Marcos nearest you is and how you can take advantage of that great offer. 2 medium, 2 topping pizzas for just $6.99 each. It's every store, every day, the Italian way. All right, here's what's coming up later on in our program. I'm very happy to welcome our buddy Cameron Nizelek, who you've become a big fan of, I'm assuming, as a part of our Northside Hospital postgame show. He'll be back with us again tomorrow for that. He'll preview the game against Tennessee later on in our show. We'll have Jeff Sintel for a lot of recruiting talk here in just a moment. Big list of visitors. Jeff will give you all the latest on that. Before we kind of get to some of that, though, I do want to kind of focus in some more on what we might see tomorrow against Tennessee. And I thought that Kirby Smart gave some pretty candid remarks earlier this week about something that he's still not seeing enough of from the Georgia defense. A better pass rush against Missouri, almost for sure. The unanimous response from fans and media alike was UGA did a better job with that a week ago. But Kirby admits that he's still looking for more tackles for loss, and apparently behind the scene, he's asking some tougher questions why Georgia hasn't had more of the so-called havoc plays where you get in the backfield and really make things difficult on an opposing offense. I thought this was pretty introspective from Kirby about his own assessment of kind of not just where his team is this year, but where his program is overall. This is interesting. Take a listen to this.
It's one of the most important stats we look at, and it's a havoc rate, its ability to cause negative plays, put people behind the sticks. And we've done off-season studies the last 3 years to see who led the country in tackles for a loss. Why did they lead the country in tackles for a loss? What are they doing? What can we do that they're doing? Early on, we actually thought we were doing pretty well at that, and we haven't the last couple games done as well. So it's one of those things you always want to have to put people behind the sticks, especially in today's day and age. I think to do that, you got to put yourself at risk sometimes. And we probably haven't done it as well as we want to. I also think if you look at the SEC defenses, there's traditionally not a lot of those teams up there in tackles for a loss. Because when we did the study, Clemson was one that popped up. Miami was one that popped up. Michigan was one that popped up. You didn't see SEC teams popping up. Why is that? I don't know. There's pretty good defenses in our conference.
I certainly appreciate Smart's willingness to sort of pursue that issue and pay close attention to that. I think if I had to guess why it is that SEC teams typically have fewer tackles for loss than other defenses, as Kirby says, they're not worse defenses, but they do get fewer tackles for loss. My guess is that may have something to do with the fact that a lot of other conferences just simply have teams that run more plays per game. More plays per game give more opportunities for tackles for loss. But it's kind of a cool thing to hear Kirby Smart looking so deeply into that. And I think a lot of Georgia fans, just like we said earlier, they hope to see some bigger plays on offense from guys like DeAndre Swift. More tackles for loss wouldn't be a bad thing to see from this Georgia defense either. And speaking of that, let's look more at what's going to happen tomorrow in Athens. Let's do our Kroger checklist to kind of get you ready for everything that you can look for in Athens on Saturday for a game day. It all starts for us somewhere around, I'm going to say 1 p.m. I'm going to be loosely defined on this, around 1 p.m. for our Kroger kickoff near the Dog Walk. We'll bring you live coverage of the Dog Walk and all the other pregame action tomorrow on our DawgNation video channels for our Kroger kickoff. As I said, around 1 p.m., we'll do that to get you ready for the Dog Walk. We'll have everybody, Jeff Sintel, as a part of that. That'll all be really fun. Then kickoff between Georgia and Tennessee at 3:30 p.m. We'll be on the forum at forum.DawgNation.com talking to you about all of that. And then immediately after the game from the UGA bookstore, it's our Northside Hospital postgame show with Jeff Sintel, with the former Georgia punter Cameron Nizelek. And don't forget, speaking of the UGA bookstore, tomorrow before the game, you can stop by there and see the former Georgia great and Carolina Panther Thomas Davis, who will be signing autographs. Davis, one of the great Georgia Bulldogs of the early 2000s, and he's going to be there at the UGA bookstore tomorrow. So that's all a part of our Kroger checklist. And speaking of Kroger, they invite you to say hello to lower prices at your local Atlanta Kroger. Look for the yellow tags on every aisle, the lowest prices on some of your favorite items. Great stuff there from Kroger, and great to have you with us here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. And now for more on what is a long list of recruiting visitors and a really interesting subplot with five-star linebacker DeAndre Swift. I should say, Nakobe Dean, excuse me. Let's talk to Jeff Sintel right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Say hello to Jeff Sintel. Jeff, it is great to have you with us here today on a DawgNation Daily. We really appreciate your time being here. And as I've been kind of talking about before you joined us, there's a lot of kind of recruiting storylines from the game on Saturday that I want to get into. But before that, would you mind if we spent some time talking about something that you tweeted about from your Twitter account at Jeff Sintel yesterday, and something you've also written about at the forum and online at DawgNation.com involving Nakobe Dean? Would that be okay for us to kind of dive into that just for a few minutes here off the top?
I think that's what the people would like to hear, don't you think, Brandon?
Yeah, I think it is, and I have some really strong feelings on this, and you and I have talked about this off-air, but I want to bring people in on the conversation we've been having off-air, on the air here for a moment. And let me try to get the facts correct first, and then I'll give you my opinion. So Nakobe Dean, the five-star linebacker from Mississippi, was initially scheduled to take an official visit to Georgia next week for the Vanderbilt game. That visit was scheduled on Dean's behalf by his mom, Niketa Dean, who was quoted and you spoke to this week for DawgNation. But Georgia asked Dean not to take his official visit next week because of the fact that they didn't feel like they're going to be able to roll the red carpet out the way they like to do it for official visits, because it was a game week. They would have preferred Dean come after the season's over in kind of an off non-game week setting so they can really roll the red carpet out. Do I have the facts correct on this thus far?
Yeah, Brandon, that's pretty much the nutshell. But there's a lot of, I guess, moving pieces with here, and I guess it all starts with the fact that Nakobe Dean is not the normal average recruit. First of all, I think Georgia just does things a little bit differently than other programs do. We see, and I reported on DawgNation.com and on the forum, that Auburn, for instance, jumped at the chance to get Nakobe Dean on campus in any way possible for an official visit, and they got him the weekend of that stellar Liberty game. In November 17th. Well, Georgia, and let's be real, right? I mean, let's be real here with Georgia, okay? They would rather have the recruits take as late an official visit as possible. And that's what they're trying to do here. But it is a little bit of a dice roll. And there's some complicated algebra with all this a little bit, because with Nakobe, this is a young man that has never made a B in high school, ever. And he doesn't want that to ever happen. He wants to look back at his high school years because he's going to be a future engineer, and he wants to say, I never made a B. He's a National Honor Society member. So it's not really easy for him to just say, oh, I'm going to go I'm going to go over the weekend, show up on Saturday, be there on Sunday, leave, and come back home on Monday on my official visit. Because that means he misses a day of school. That likely misses his younger sister, misses a day of school, and that sort of thing matters to his family. It also intersects with the fact that Horn Lakes High in Memphis, kind of the Memphis greater area, but it's actually in Mississippi. Horn Lakes is contending for the 6A state title in Mississippi this year, and should his team go all the way, that means his final game would be on November the 30th. And that means I doubt he would take an official visit right after that championship weekend. So that really leaves before the dead period, and then he's going to play in the Alabama-Mississippi All-Star game from December the 12th until December the 17th. That really only leaves essentially the December 7th recruiting weekend for him to take any other official visits besides the one that, and we also need to make sure we underscore the fact that Georgia kind of vacated their official visit weekend they had set up for Vanderbilt. And the Dean family was kind of like, we don't understand why you have to make this official visit so special. We're just regular folks. I mean, we understand that you guys want it to be great, but we don't really need all this. We'd just be happy to be there. But there is a little bit of underscore here. Also, I need to say, and it feels like very complicated sometimes when you're looking at intersecting lives with this championship contending program. But the thing that will never probably be said is Georgia probably, they don't want to have their marquee official visitors take their official visits during the season. They want them in those last 2 weeks prior to the early signing period. And that formula has worked great so far for Georgia. And the other thing here, and I'm just going to say it, it's probably not the best idea for Georgia to juggle an important visit for Nakobe Dean, an official visit for Nakobe Dean, with the fact that it will be preparing that weekend after Vanderbilt to play LSU. So that would be time on Sunday preparation, time on Monday. That probably what Georgia needs to be doing is not hosting a vital remaining official visitor for the 2019 class.
Okay, so I think that's a really good point, too. But the other part of this that I feel the most strongly about is that I just think the Vanderbilt weekend, and forget the fact that it's not a marquee opponent, even if it was, Georgia playing LSU at home or some team like that, I feel like hosting this official visit in early October is not the time you want to host Nakobe Dean. And, Jeff, I feel strongly enough about this that even if Dean, who I guess is going to go somewhere else that weekend instead of coming to Georgia, even if ultimately this means that Georgia loses on Dean, that Dean ends up signing somewhere else in December as opposed to coming to Georgia, I think from a strategic standpoint, Georgia still made the right decision. I just think that I love the strategy involved in how recruiting work gets done. I love all of that. And even if ultimately this backfires on Georgia, it's still the right play. Because I believe that if you allow Dean to come take his official visit in early October, even though that's what his family really wants to do. And I don't mean to, push back against their wishes here. I want to be respectful to them. But if you do, then you've lost your final bargaining chip in terms of it's very hard to get him to come back and take another unofficial visit because it's expensive. To come from Memphis to Athens, Georgia is not a cheap trip, and he'd be forced to kind of pay his own way for that. But as long as you've got that still official visit out there, assuming he doesn't use all 5 somewhere else besides Georgia, you've always got that bargaining chip you can throw out there to him of, hey, how about you come for an official visit? We'll pay for it all. You'll be here. We'll show you a good time. That gravitational pull takes over there, and the emotion of saying no becomes a very hard thing to conjure up at that point. Conversely, Jeff, and then I'm going to yield the floor back to you, if he takes the official visit in early October, then Auburn, Florida State, Alabama, LSU, all these schools potentially in the mix here, maybe even, I guess, Texas A&M to a certain extent, all these other teams here who could potentially be recruiting against Georgia can take their shots at Georgia of why you don't want to go there and the depth chart's too deep and blah, 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 blah throughout all the rest of October, November, and December. And there's really no way for Georgia to counteract that. I just think that first Saturday in October is the wrong date for a 5-star linebacker to take his official visit.
Yeah, I guess the other things to think about there is he's only used one, and that was the one official he's already taken to Alabama. Now Texas A&M slides in now and gets that slot that Georgia, I guess we can say, vacated there and have some sense of accuracy to it. So Auburn's getting an official, but the way it stands now is it's for Georgia, the most likely scenario where Georgia gets an official visit, especially one of those late official visits that they prefer would be for Horn Lakes not to win a state championship. And then there's also a promise the Dean family has made where if anything opens up in the schedule late, then LSU gets that visit as well. Now, and there's FSU and Georgia kind of are like to be determined or very much up in the air to say the least. So the one thing, I understand why our readership and the audience reacted to a tweet and the message board post and that little link I put in a DawgNation story in yesterday's Intel the way it did. But I actually don't feel as troubled. And we'll get into that in a subsequent, post up on the site. But I don't think that Georgia should feel as troubled about what's happening here. The family has kind of told me that visit they took back in May during the spring when she was on the scavenger hunt visit was about as functional of an official visit as Georgia could ever offer. That's when Kirby shows up. They take the tour around the campus, but it feels more like one of those cool 2018 Nouveau mini games where you're having to find artifacts around the campus. You're having to meet Coach Smart and take a selfie around campus where it's not just a boring drudgery tour. And Georgia also master recruiting here. They found a way for Nakobe Dean, the future engineer, to interact with the Dean of Engineering along that trip as well. So there was a lot of questions and answers sessions there that functioned quite like an official visit. He's been to Georgia before, and there are things that family feels Georgia does better than any other schools that are currently recruiting him. Now, it's an interesting little gumbo. It's going to sound a little bit like Clay Webb, but that family feels, the best group of men that could recruit him and take care of him would probably be Florida State. And Georgia has its check in another area. LSU has checks in other areas, but LSU has other concerns as well that we will detail in a subsequent blog. But I just think the Nakobe Dean storyline is very, very interesting. And it is a little bit of high-stakes recruiting poker where Georgia frees up that official visit weekend for the Vanderbilt game. And let's be honest. I know how we make recruiting out to be the big deal. But the focus at hand at first should be the season, the present season, winning those games, establishing a championship resume. I think all those things should appropriately come first.
I think it's a fascinating story, Jeff, and I think your coverage of it has been so much fun to read because there are twists and turns. It's almost like you're playing chess, you're playing Risk, one of those great strategic games that we may have grown up playing, and this is like real-life version of that, and it's just really fun, and your coverage of it makes it a lot more fun to follow. Let me change the subject, though, to something we talked about a little bit before you joined us, and that is the rich list of visitors for Saturday. Your posts at the forum at forum.dawgnation.com have likewise kept us up to date on all of this. I talked about Lewis Seen and the impact that this Saturday could have on him on the screen. If you're watching this on video, you see a lot of the other names that are going to be there. And I guess one of the names you've also kind of added to this from the forum at forum.dawgnation.com is the fact that Jaden Hazelwood, I believe, is expected to be there too. And let me start with Hazelwood, and we'll take this a couple different places. I mean, I guess there is a certain comfort level in hearing Hazelwood being there on Saturday for some Georgia fans, given the fact that he hasn't been, unless I'm mistaken here, has not been to a game in Athens yet this season. So having him there on an unofficial capacity on Saturday, probably pretty good news for a lot of UGA fans.
It's a very good thing. I think it will be some of those feels that made him choose Georgia in the first place will be there. I think the story still remains with Jaden. It's another school is going to have to do an awfully lot to wow him, as well as Georgia doing something that makes him back off the attachment he has to the program right now. I think Jaden Hazelwood, in his own unique little way, is still one of the major, I would say, club bouncers a little bit is the way I look at it, in terms of him and Nolan Smith really wanting to make sure that the right guys that feel like they want to be a part of this Georgia class and do something special across 3 or 4 years in Athens. I still think those two guys are still very, very vital stakeholders in what's happening at Georgia for the class of 2019. And that's a pretty good guest list, as I said. I'm not trying to hype it up too much, but when we say it's the biggest recruiting weekend of the year so far, it is. But there's really not a lot of other things to compare it to right now. So there'll be some buzz, there'll be some energy for the fans to see. And a lot of these guys, Jaden Hazelwood himself included, will finally for the first time get to see the new locker room, the west end zone, and all the different ways of watching a Georgia football game. from a different vantage point than he has before.
It's almost such a big list. It's sort of hard to ask you about all of it without just sort of going name by name, and I obviously don't want to do that. We don't have time for that. But, I mean, if you just had to sort of sum up the whole deal in 60 to 90 seconds in terms of, what Georgia fans should really be thinking about beyond the fact that it's the official for scene and that Ryan Trouble Davis is coming there to be a part of that with him, and just what is, from a reporter's standpoint, what's kind of on your mind about all of this on Saturday from the recruiting angle?
Well, I don't think the following. I don't think John Emery Jr.'s visit can ever get enough attention, because I think that's a great leverage visit, or just a securing the foundation and making sure those connections are really strong. Again, all I need to say here is this will be the first time that John Emery Jr. has ever seen a game inside Sanford Stadium. And it's going to be a conference game, and it's going to get loud and proud at some point. And there will be the night atmosphere in Athens for him to experience as well on a game weekend. And I think, me and I kid about this a lot, but Georgia's lost a lot of big football games over the past 10 or 15 years. And I don't think Georgia has ever lost a Saturday night in Athens comparison with any other school. So I think that's something right there where the Bulldogs can show John Emery Jr. and his family something new. And a neat little subplot to that is John Emery Sr., his father, actually was a linebacker in Tennessee for a few seasons in his college career as well. So I think the John Emery Jr. visit is big. To pepper in a few more names, I do think that, Lewis is great, Trouble is great, Travon Walker continuing to come to every home date he possibly can is always a big deal. You've also got Bill Norton making his first trip down. That's part of that Tennessee 3. And I'm sure Bill Norton's going to look down on that scene and say, yeah, this is the reason why I'm leaving the Volunteer State, much like Cade Mays was the year before.
And the other name to add to this, and we'll finish up with this, Jeff, is the presence, I guess, of Tresman Marshall, a guy that you threw a lot of praise towards on Before the Hedges on Wednesday. That got a lot of attention because of the fact that Marshall is a guy that people down in South Georgia are just raving about right now. Why suddenly all the attention towards Marshall? Now, he's been a great player the entire time he's been committed to UGA, but it seems like there's a bullet next to his name as of late.
Well, I just think for him, he just continues to do amazing things. He's really. I know everybody had their affection, I guess, for the Owen Pappoe storyline earlier this year during spring, but very quietly, Tresman Marshall, like I said on a couple of platforms, a couple of our platforms, I think that by talking to coaches in that area, remember now, Tresman has been a quarterback on a state championship team as a freshman. He's carried the ball in his junior year for big games for a state championship game as a junior. He's a senior all the while. He's been playing linebacker for Clinch County as well down there in South Georgia. And those boys, those young men they say down South Georgia boy or Georgia boy for a reason. And he fits the bill. And a lot of folks tell me that I trust on their scouting insight as well as my own and just watching the film. And they tell me, listen, the closest thing Georgia has got to a Roquan Smith right now, that has to be Tresman Marshall. But he's 6'1.5". He's very physical. He's a thumper. He's about 235. Just an overall excellent football player. And, maybe, Brandon, to just wrap up this weekend in perspective, just tie a ribbon on the recruiting weekend, I think the only thing that is missing, perhaps, would be a marquee 2020 quarterback. That would kind of be some of the things. The South Florida DBs, the Tyreek Stevensons, the Kaiir Elam, those guys are not in town this week. But I think, barring something unexpected or spur of the moment, but I think those are about the only missing pieces. And it's an example of Georgia doing the following. They're not searching for their recruits anymore, not this program. They are just cementing their recruits now with their Saturday game day visit.
Boy, Jeff, that's well said and always great stuff. We appreciate your time here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. I'm looking forward to having you as a part of our Kroger kickoff tomorrow before the game and our Northside Hospital postgame show from the UGA bookstore after the game. It is a fun environment. Athens is going to be sideways from dawn till dusk and beyond tomorrow night. I can't wait to share it with you, and thanks for being with us here today.
All right, guys. Have yourself a good weekend and drive safe.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC 3.
All right, really good stuff there with Jeff Sintel. I think it's fantastic. And let me go back to the Nakobe Dean thing here for a moment. I just think the overall bottom line on this is that Georgia made the right decision with suggesting to the Dean family that you come in another time, because I think it is better for Georgia to have Dean come later. My prediction is that they'll eventually get what they want, and they'll get Nakobe Dean for an official visit in like the month of December sometime, where it can really have the maximum impact. And if it doesn't happen that way, then this was still the best overall strategy, because there's a big difference between Georgia here and Auburn. As Jeff said, Auburn's going to host Nakobe Dean for an official visit for the Liberty game. You know why? Because Auburn's desperate to get Nakobe Dean on campus. Georgia's recruiting right now at a much higher level than Auburn is. Georgia does not have to be desperate. And when you behave desperately when you don't have to, that's when you end up making a pretty significant blunder. I believe from Georgia's standpoint, the blunder would have been, okay, let's shoehorn Nakobe Dean into a Vanderbilt game day environment. It is a night game, but nonetheless, that would be kind of shoehorning him in there when he just deserves the extra attention. Georgia's not, at least I believe, as far down the road as it is with Lewis Seen. Lewis Seen coming in for a game, day official visit, it's not that big of a deal, because as told you, every visit to Georgia keeps getting better and better and better. I think that Georgia's in the door with Nakobe Dean, but probably sitting at the kitchen table right now with Lewis Seen. Those are very different official visits. You want the best foot forward official visit in December, if for no other reason, and obviously Georgia can't say this, but we'll be candid here on the show, if for no other reason, host him in December so you don't give as much time for other programs to refute the good vibes that he has coming off of Athens. And those OVs in December leave recruits with good vibes. So I think it's well played by Georgia, even though there's a risk of it not working. I also think it's a fascinating story. I think that Jeff's done a good job covering it. All right, SEC through time here. Before we move on with that, let me remind you that my friends at MyBookie this weekend are going to take good care of you. Whether it's the golf, the NFL, whatever you want to get your action in on, college football. I gave you my MyBookie best bets yesterday. How about that, my MyBookie best bets? I gave those to you yesterday. Well, if you want to have better bets than me, you probably will, and you can get your action in at the place where the pros play, MyBookie. Find them online at MyBookie. It's MyBookie. Just search for them. You'll find them. And then use the promo code DawgNation, all one word, spelled the way it's supposed to be, DAWG. You play, you win, you get paid. It's as simple as that, and your first deposit can be matched dollar for dollar. But you got to hurry up and go right now. Use the promo code DawgNation. Your first deposit can be matched dollar for dollar when you find MyBookie online. All right, couple stories to get to here. Interesting piece at AL.com about the possibility that former Clemson quarterback Kelly Bryant could transfer to Auburn. A lot of schools sort of lining up, the rumor mill kind of heating up about where Bryant may be for his final year of eligibility in 2019. I find all of this to be really weird, though, from the Auburn standpoint. First of all, let me show you Phil Savage, who's the former executive director of the Senior Bowl, also, ironically, former Alabama color analyst on its radio broadcast, suggesting that maybe Bryant at Auburn could make some sense. Phil Savage says to AL.com, if he went to Auburn, he could absolutely be a dangerous weapon, because we know the Gus Malzahn offense is at its best when the quarterback can be a ball carrier, like what we saw with Nick Marshall and Cam Newton. So that's Phil Savage saying, hey, maybe it's a good idea to have Bryant at Auburn. For me, though, it would feel like the white flag of surrender for the Tigers. I mean, after all, we've already seen Kelly Bryant on a better roster, by the way, Clemson a year ago, than Auburn for the next couple of years. On a better roster, Bryant not being good enough to beat Alabama, which is the in-state foe that Auburn's always going to measure itself by. So if Auburn were to accept the cast-off quarterback from Clemson, no disrespect to Kelly Bryant, this is essentially saying to Auburn that we're playing for second best in the SEC West, not trying to be a serious contender at Alabama, because Kelly Bryant's not beating Alabama. Speaking of Alabama, I thought that Nick Saban had an interesting quote as relayed by Cecil Hurd, a columnist for the Tuscaloosa News. Saban drawing a line about how much of a tougher schedule he wants to see not only Alabama but the rest of the SEC play. Keep this in mind when Georgia plays UMass in a few weeks. Saban says this week, I want to see 9 or 10 conference games, and 2 out-of-conference games against teams like Oklahoma and Arizona State. I don't know how Arizona State gets lumped into that, but no one in the SEC seems to agree with me. Whether that's true or not, it's kind of interesting to hear Saban really pushing for bigger and better scheduling. This is one area in which I think most Georgia fans would actually agree with Saban on that, and frankly, I think Kirby Smart probably would as well. And then finally here for our SEC through, speaking of some scheduling, some tough games, 2 pretty interesting national games this week. Ohio State at Penn State, Stanford at Notre Dame. They are both at 7:30 on Saturday night. And I think that both of these games have some interesting, compelling stuff for SEC fans here. First of all, with the Ohio State-Penn State game on Saturday night, watch for the winner of this game, the quarterback, either Haskins from Ohio State or McSorley from Penn State. Let's see how much Heisman buzz, though, that winning quarterback from this game takes out of the game. Maybe more of a threat to Tua Tagovailoa for the award than you might realize coming off this game. And then Georgia fans in particular here, pay attention to Stanford Notre Dame, because the winner of that game on Saturday night is going to have some real steam for the college football playoff. And if you're a Georgia fan, I think you're probably rooting for Stanford here because the Notre Dame schedule really opens up and is much easier after the fact. So the winner of Stanford Notre Dame really puts themselves in an interesting playoff position on Saturday. That may be something worth paying attention to, and we'll make that your SEC. And by the way, before we transition here and talk to our buddy Cameron Nislek from our Northside Hospital post-game show, let me send out some congratulations as well to a couple Georgia guys, Aaron Murray, the former Georgia quarterback, and Boss Bailey, who are both going to be enshrined in the Georgia Hall of Fame, Georgia-Florida Hall of Fame, I should say, this October for the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. So congratulations to both of them on that. And with that said, let me talk to Cameron Nislek here. We'll see him on Saturday at the UGA bookstore once again for our Northside Hospital post-game show. He also makes his first appearance, I guess, on DawgNation Daily presented by Marco's Pizza. Cameron, thanks for your time here this morning. Hope you're doing well, and we really appreciate you being with us. So a little issue there with Cameron on that. It's been that kind of day around the DawgNation world, I guess. I almost blew my ears out completely on that. So we'll get Cameron taken care of. Hopefully y'all survived that deal there. We'll get that taken care of and get back here in just a moment. All right, so let me take a couple comments, and then we'll see if we can get Cameron back up and running here just for a moment. Philip Jordan Wells says, we were talking about Penn State, Ohio State a moment ago, says Penn State for the upset in the You Deserve to Be Punished Bowl. Yeah, I guess both those programs have had their share of off-field issues to deal with there, but certainly that will be an interesting subplot to what should be a terrific game. Night game environment, by the way, there in Happy Valley. All right, with that said, let's talk to Cameron Nislek here for a moment. Cameron, thanks for your time today. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Can you guys hear me all right?
I sure can, Cameron. Thanks for being patient with us. We're glad to have you here. And we talked, obviously, a lot before you joined us about what our expectations are for Georgia and Tennessee on Saturday. You're a guy that knows a lot of these Georgia players well. You played with them last year. You saw your team blow out Tennessee. When you think to this game on Saturday, what's something that you have in your mind? What are you looking to see from Georgia and Tennessee on Saturday?
You know, I think we struggled a little bit against Missouri, so I'm really looking for the team to bounce back. And I know the guys really get up for Tennessee, so I think it's going to be a really great bounce-back game for the Dogs on the Saturday.
Obviously, Georgia's a huge favorite in this game, and as I said, there was the blowout win a year ago. At practice this week, my assumption is that may mean that Kirby Smart's a little extra tough, you know, wanting to make sure that players don't get too comfortable thinking it's going to be an easy win. After all, you've got some fodder, as you said, because Missouri did challenge Georgia a little bit last week. Is that true? Is this a situation where Kirby's probably a little on edge, maybe his assistant's also a little on extra edge, just given the fact that maybe there might be a tendency to think it could be an easy win for Georgia, almost a dangerous temptation to overlook Tennessee because there's some bigger games looming over the next few weeks?
Yeah, you know, I think Kirby was tough on the guys after the game last week at Missouri, so he's definitely going to be harder on them all throughout the week, and he's definitely not going to let the team come out flat this week against Tennessee.
And obviously you mentioned what a great rivalry game it is, but you're a guy that kind of, you know, came to Georgia having been in the Ivy League at Columbia. How quickly do you remember kind of getting ingrained to just how serious some of these SEC rivalries were? How much fun was that for you to kind of learn about and really become a part of? And, you know, how quickly do you feel like you kind of got indoctrinated into that culture?
Absolutely. You know, I always heard coming to Georgia that the SEC means more, and, you know, really something that I kind of figured out right away, and Tennessee was one of those games coming out there, and I had a great fan base there, but it obviously wasn't one of my best games against Tennessee, but, you know, it really does mean a lot playing in the SEC against big-time games every week.
Well, Cameron, I will say this. I know so many people have been so thrilled to have you as a part of a Northside Hospital post-game show. I hear from people all the week about how great your analysis is and how much fun your communications have been on that show. I am looking forward to having you back there as well again tomorrow, and I know for you it's another chance to be in Athens and experience a game day environment and then hang out and talk a little football in the afternoon. I imagine you're looking forward to it as well.
Absolutely. You know, there's really nothing like Saturdays in Athens, and I wish I could still be out on the field, but you know, this is a close second for me.
Well, we'll look forward to seeing you back on the field again soon. I know you've got a great opportunity coming up with the new spring football league. You're going to be on Steve Spurrier's team, is that right?
That's right. I know that might be scary for some Dog fans, but yeah, I'm going to be on the Orlando Apollo. They just announced the name last week, so When I come play in Atlanta, everyone should come check it out.
So it's the Orlando Apollos. Is that what you said? That's the last name?
That's correct, yeah.
That's a cool name, Cam. So, yeah, we'll enjoy your football analysis here this week and for the next, hopefully, few weeks. And then after that, we'll look forward to seeing you back on the football field as a part of the Orlando Apollos. Georgia fans don't like rooting for Spurrier, but for you, I'm assuming they'll make a bit of an exception.
I hope so.
All right, Cameron, it's great to talk to you, and I'll see you tomorrow for our Northside Hospital
postgame
show.
Tomorrow.
Good stuff there. All right, good stuff there from Cameron Nislek, Northside Hospital Sports Medicine postgame show tomorrow from the UJ Bookstore after the game. That's going to be a lot of fun. Something else is a lot of fun. I mentioned our inductees into the Georgia-Florida Hall of Fame, Aaron Murray, Boss Bailey, and they'll be a part of what should be another big Georgia victory coming up here in just a couple of weeks. It's 29 days from right now. Georgia travels back to Jacksonville, the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. We think the Georgia Bulldogs are going to get another win. It's our Gator Hater Countdown, which we do every single day right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. And then to wrap up the week here, quick recap of some of what I think is going to happen in the SEC games here this weekend. I actually kind of like a few of the underdogs this week, as I sort of explained yesterday as part of our MyBookie Best Bets. I think Arkansas keeps it closer against Texas A&M. I think that Southern Miss may actually keep it a little close, and the experts think against Auburn. Watch out for Ole Miss keeping it close maybe as well. Should be a fun weekend. We'll see you Monday right here on DawgNation Daily. And on video. I know that we were a little late getting on the show on Facebook, but my understanding is we were on YouTube the entire time. Is that correct? So if you want to watch the early portion of the show, you can check out the YouTube video. In fact, you don't even have to let this video end. I think that on YouTube you have the on-demand playback actually during the video, which is a great feature that YouTube offers that Facebook doesn't. So you can check that out. Or if you want to listen to the podcast version of the show, we'll have that posted right away. So we talked some Georgia running backs off the top. We talked some things of that nature off the top. So if you missed any portion of that because for whatever reason Facebook was being a little fickle today, we'll give you a chance to take care of that by checking out our podcast. We'll have it at the world-famous DawgNation.com. And by the way, even if you're not an avid podcast listener, one of the things that I think is kind of cool is just to sort of subscribe, whether you have like the Apple Podcast player or if you're on the Android side of things, just subscribe to the podcast so it's always there for you in case you need it. You know, you may not ever have to listen to the podcast. You may prefer watching the video. It's amazing how many of you listen to the show, but you listen through the streaming video portion of it, which, listen, I have no preference on platforms. Whatever platform you guys prefer for the show is certainly fine for me, but it may be one of those things just from a convenience standpoint. You like having that podcast in the queue for you in case something weird happens like it happens today. And obviously, we take that kind of stuff really seriously, so we'll do our part to make sure that nothing like that happens anymore. All right, let me get a few comments here, and then we'll try to get out of here. Randy Ray Compton says, is it Saturday? Yeah, this is one that I'm really excited about. I think it's the 3:30 start. I think it's a little bit more manageable temperatures. I hope I'm not overselling that, but I've been told it's like early, or I should say low 80s tomorrow, which is a much better deal than what we've had for the last few games. I think it'll be somewhat dark enough at the start of the fourth quarter. We should see the light up Sanford with the Krypton theme playing from the Redcoats. Obviously, as Jeff kind of chronicled, it's a bunch of great recruits, and it's a chance for, 5 games in, let's see where Georgia is here. Let's see how much better Georgia's gotten. And I do believe that Tennessee, even against a better opponent, is capable of playing better than it played a week ago against Florida, but Georgia may be just so superior to the Vols that it may not matter in terms of the overall outcome and the final score. So I'm really fascinated to see what happens here. Barry Watkins says, I'm ready to see a complete game. Yeah, I completely agree. Dwayne Mark Killing says, can I host DawgNation one day? Listen, I'm sure many of you could do a good job sitting here talking about the Georgia Bulldogs. Gary and Christian Gulisano says, BA, I have a feeling if Georgia doesn't put up numbers like Florida did this versus Tennessee this week, it'll be more clickbait for media members to talk down about Georgia and watch out for upset alert against Florida. So, Gary and Christian, let me nitpick this subject just for a moment. I think this is an example of the media getting a bad rap, because if you want to look at like the somewhat like negative portions of reaction to some of the Georgia games so far this season, I think it is unfair to say, this is just the media stirring the pot. This is just the media stirring the pot. Most of what you have read on like the kind of official media sites, ours included, is conversations that got started in a fan-centric platform, like a forum, for instance, or like on Twitter or something along those lines. I mean, here around DawgNation, we do the Ask DawgNation series. I just wrote one this week for DawgNation.com. And part of the reason why we started that series, Chip writes his, Mike Griffith writes his, Jeff Sentell writes his. Part of the reason why we started that series is because we do get a lot of really compelling questions to answer. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you for a fact. Of all the questions that we get, not just me, but the rest of the DawgNation people included, an example of a sample question is not typically, how come everything's so great with UGA? That's not typically what the questions are. The conversation around Georgia, to the point that it's somewhat pointed or critical, a lot of this is, hey, why aren't they throwing to the tight ends more? Or why didn't Georgia stop the run versus Missouri? Why aren't we seeing so-and-so play more? This, that. I mean, check out our forum at forum.dawgnation.com, which I think is fairly representative of some of the other forums that might be out there. It is not like the fans are the ones that are, trying to keep the main thing and stay positive and, just enjoy the ride, and the media is always out there trying to draw everybody outside. Media for the most part is reactionary to the conversation that's being happened in the larger culture. And that conversation started by fans. So, while I don't typically think of myself as being in the media bubble, this may be one moment where I'll somewhat stick up for my colleagues here. Danny Smith says the media and other fan base is ready to see Georgia fail. So, Danny, one of the things I've said about that is that there is a media narrative about Georgia, but that I do think is, I'm talking about like national type stuff here. I do think there's a media narrative about Georgia that's somewhat skeptical and negative, and I think it's biased, but I don't think it's because they hate Georgia, as I've said before. I think there's an element of the media that's worried about the SEC and, to a certain extent, all of college football just becoming boring. I mean, remember, most of the country does not live in this, corner of the Southeast. Most of the country, by most, the majority of, the majority of the population lives in the Midwest or lives in the West, lives up north. And the thought of the, college football playoff every single year being Alabama, Georgia, and Clemson, to a lot of the country, that's a turnoff. The same way if we, woke up one day and the college football playoff was Wisconsin, Nebraska, and Notre Dame, we'd be like, I don't want to watch these, thick-ankled Big Ten teams. It's the same reaction when it comes to some of the stuff, down here as well. So I think if Georgia ends up not being as good as some of the preseason prognostications suggested Georgia would be, to some people in the media, that'd be a good thing because it means that something interesting happened. Ultimately, that's what a lot of these national media people are wishing for and hoping for, that something interesting occurs to keep this from being a so-called boat race. Nathan Corsi with a little, Corsi, I hope I didn't mispronounce that, says, who's that coming down the track? He's already getting ready to go for his game day. Good to see that, Nathan. Jennifer Korn brings up a great example. It's just like the way the ESPN always plays the Yankees and the Red Sox. That's a really good point. Big, big fan bases, big baseball followings, for people down here in the South, that's probably too much. Now, I do believe that sometimes ESPN, because it's situated in the Northeast, is not aware of its own bias here and thinks that, the Yankees, Red Sox are a bigger deal nationally than they really are because from a geographic proximity standpoint, they're just closer there. So it just seems like a bigger and better story, the kind of thing that ought to get more coverage. And they're sort of not aware of their own, I guess, geographic shortcomings and geographic biases here. So I think that's a pretty fair point because what we've seen is, go back to 2000 when the Mets and the Yankees played in the World Series in the so-called Subway Series, terrible ratings. People didn't like that. It was a huge deal in New York. The rest of the country, tuned out. All right. Wayne Foland, who does check in from Pennsylvania, by the way, says, "Hey, I love my Yankees." That's the other thing I got to remember too is, we have a big diverse audience, people kind of all over everywhere, and a lot of folks have favorite teams that are not quite the same professional sports teams as mine would be. All right, let me pop over to a YouTube here for a moment. And once again, for those of you who may be joining us, missed what I said a moment ago, if you were on Facebook at the beginning, you had a little bit of an issue getting to us. I certainly apologize for that today. It seems like we've gotten that fixed, but I also just not myself out of YouTube. Let me get over there. All right, let me pull up YouTube here. We'll take a few comments, and then we will get ready to roll here on a really fun Friday, getting ready for a great day in Athens tomorrow. Robert Thrower says, not as our most unused weapon. It's a shame, really. Robert, I wrote about this at DawgNation yesterday as a part of my contribution to our Ask DawgNation series about, why it is the tight ends haven't been used more and why it is, from a weird statistical anomaly, Justin Fields has thrown to tight ends more than Jake Fromm has. I actually got some quotes from a couple other Georgia tight ends who sort of helped out with the explanation for that. So I invite you to check that out at DawgNation.com. Green Soldier says, BA, do you think it's possible to score 80 points on a team? Ready to find out. Yeah, listen, I know for many of you, if Georgia ever did break 80, I think that Tennessee, for many of you, would be a pretty good candidate to do that against. So maybe you'll get your wish tomorrow. K9 Blue says, BA, do you think Kirby will allow Justin Fields to let the ball fly and allow us to keep the offense open late into the game, even with a large lead? I hope that when Fields comes into the game, they call the same plays for him they'd call for anybody else. Now, in that same situation, now do you protect his running somewhat so he doesn't get hurt? There's a debate maybe you do on that, just somewhat. But Georgia needs Fields to be seasoned and ready because there could become a time they need him, because of injury or something like that to Jake Fromm. So the issue for me as you move to like the 5th and 6th game of the season with LSU looming 2 weeks from now, the issue is not the competition between Fields and Fromm. For now, Fromm seems to have won that. The issue right now is, do you have a backup that you trust? That's a very important part of winning a national championship because quarterbacks get hurt. Stuff like that just happens from time to time. And Georgia's got to have a guy that it can trust behind Jake Fromm. And the only way you get to that is to get some playing time for Fields. There is no chance he redshirt, nor should he redshirt. I mean, I think that he needs to – hopefully he plays a lot on Saturday. Hopefully it's a great performance for Jake Fromm, and Fromm can do his customary deal of resting some here in the fourth quarter, and we see a lot of Justin Fields beyond that, and I hope he does get a chance to throw and keep the offense moving, not just because somebody said they want to score 80 points on Tennessee, but because you just want to keep getting that good experience for Justin Fields there. K9 Blues agrees. I appreciate that. Eric Smith says, can Torrey Johnson switch to the defensive line if he doesn't break on the offensive line? The problem with that is you see defensive linemen switch over and become good offensive linemen. Lamont Gilliard's an example of that. You just don't really see that many good offensive linemen switch over, or I should say offensive linemen switch over and become good defensive linemen. It's just a tougher switch to make because I think for the most part, defensive linemen are asked to be more athletic. You can be a less athletic defensive lineman and become a rock-solid offensive lineman, but the odds of you being able to make that athletic transition to defensive line are just not quite as likely. Now, obviously, I am neither former offense nor defensive lineman, but that is certainly what I've been told. And I just observed this over the course of time as well. C. Hill says, I hope we can keep UT to a goose egg. Boy, I'm the same way. I love the idea of a shutout here. That'd be really exciting. Although Hard Times 57 says it could be a late touchdown against the second and third teamers. C. Lock, or maybe it's just Clock, says, I'll be honest with you, our offense looked like kind of soft. I think that Connor may have liked that one. I think our offense looked kind of soft against Missouri. They are probably going to go ham on Tennessee. Yeah, Clock, I'm kind of interested in seeing the same thing here because here's one thing I don't quite have an understanding of. When you get physically, I don't want to say manhandled, that's probably too strong of a word to use, but Kirby Smart did use a similar word to that when he talked about Missouri last week. When you get pushed around, like, how can you respond to that? And what I mean here is, I mean a specific thing. Is it the kind of thing where you just have to sort of bow your back and, physically step up in a level that you didn't step up before? That seems hard to do, right? I mean, no one would question whether or not a team was playing with full effort. Obviously, Georgia's playing with full effort, just had a bad Saturday last week, at least in terms of stopping the run. Or is there something schematically that can be done to make pushing back a little easier? I'll give you the perfect example. I mean, I had my mouth open, jaw-droppingly shocked by how much Auburn out-physical Georgia in November at the game in Jordan-Hare Stadium. I mean, it pains me to say that. It stinks for me to see Auburn just come in there and just shove Georgia around. But, folks, in November, I mean, we would all be honest, right? That's kind of what happened. Auburn really had a pretty good push on both lines of scrimmage against UGA. When they played again in December, that was no longer true. Georgia reasserted itself the way that it had for every other game this season. I honestly don't know enough about football, I'm not going to lie to you, to explain how it could be so different from one time to the next. If Georgia just schematically just did something better, if it just, I don't want to say tried harder because that would be, too overly simplistic, but what is the response to, we didn't step up and get that push on the either offensive or defensive line of scrimmage the way that we could have? What is the response to that? I think seeing some of that against Tennessee on Saturday could be pretty interesting because even though Kirby is probably somewhat prone to coach speak on this, I do take him at his word when he says that Tennessee is probably more physical than you realize. I take him at his word on that. Al Clement says Saturday will be a good day to get the team ready for LSU and Auburn. Yeah, and I also think it's been, speaking of coach speak, it's been really kind of funny to see Kirby Smart publicly kind of fight back against some of that kind of stuff. Kirby, I'll use Tuesday as a for instance on this. Kirby was asked about, assessing the state of the Tennessee roster and some of the kind of, storylines that media does, roads that media do like to kind of go down here in terms of, big picture think pieces about, how things went so bad for Tennessee. And Kirby is not playing ball with that whatsoever. So, Kirby really is obviously, I think probably even privately, and Cameron Nice talked about this a little bit a moment ago, he is really trying to fight back against the temptation to look ahead at all here. Now, obviously on a show like this, when you and I are talking to each other, we can look ahead at LSU because it's a fascinating game. It's a much bigger and tougher test than Tennessee is going to be. We can say that, Kirby can, but it's been kind of funny, even if in somewhat subliminal, subconscious ways. It's been kind of funny to watch Kirby kind of push back against that. Derek Davis brings up a good point in the SEC championship game. Kerryon Johnson, who, by the way, has done great for the Detroit Lions thus far, was hurt, and that did make a difference. Yeah, there's no doubt it did. No doubt it did. That made a big difference. But I also saw Georgia opening holes with its offensive line that it didn't really do in the first meeting either. So you are correct to say that Johnson being injured did help Georgia. You can get good luck as much as you can get bad luck. In that case, Georgia got a little good luck. But Georgia's offensive line also was a good bit more physical. And maybe that's just the presence of Ben Cleveland, because y'all can probably help me remember better than I can. Did Cleveland start against Auburn in November? So now we're getting to a little bit more of the issue here. It is slightly different personnel for Georgia in December there. You inserted Ben Cleveland in the starting lineup. That made a big difference. In this case, I think your hope for Georgia in the same regard of not doing great stopping the run a week ago against Missouri, you can get some personnel upgrades here, assuming that Monty Rice plays. I think that Rice is your best run-stopping linebacker right now, and if he's back, that certainly helps a little bit. Gary and Christian Gulisano says, can Georgia have an official at the SEC championship game? That's a great question. You can only host those officials there on your campus. Good question. Plus, you would only want to, right? It's your campus that sells yourself. That's one of the reasons why I think privately Kirby Smart may not like the game in Jacksonville for Florida as much as I do, because, that's an opportunity, 5 times over the course of 10 years to really host some recruits on, I think he would prefer unofficial visits, but host them there for those unofficial visits and show off that Georgia campus. It is a little bit of a negative for recruiting. I won't deny that, even though I love going to Jacksonville every year. All right, we have got to get ready to go. A lot of comments coming in here. I'm trying to follow a lot of these. Ken Black says, when will Kirby get all the kinks worked out? I want them to look as good as they are. Yeah, I understand Ken on this, and this may be a good way to close us out today. And if I didn't get to your comment, I really apologize. I'm trying to get through as many as I can. Honestly, before I get to Ken's comment here, I will say that I was a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Convicted. I was convicted on Wednesday when, Jeff has inserted this thing into our Before the Hedges show where we do the hurry up at the end, where we see how many comments we can get to. And we got through, I don't know, probably 10 or 15 in 5 minutes. 6 comments? 15. Yeah, we got through 15 comments in 5 minutes. Maybe I should start doing that more here. Maybe I'm not getting to enough comments. So maybe Jeff's good vibes are going to rub off on me here, and I'll start trying to be quicker with my answers and get through more questions and comments. But I do think our last commenter, Ken, opens up a nice line of dialogue for us to finish up with the week on. He says, I'm ready for Georgia to start looking as good as it's supposed to look. Let's hurry up and get there. Let's get these kinks worked out. Kirby, get to it. And I completely understand that sentiment, because there is this nature of restlessness of, all throughout June and July into August, you're waiting for the season to start. And then when the season does start, it sort of feels like a false start. It's like boring game against Austin Peay, dominant blowout against South Carolina, which was just a taste. Just like a morsel of a appetizer for what the rest of the season was going to be. And then the next week, it's sort of storm ravaged Middle Tennessee State, and I use that in quotation marks because while it was terrible other places, it never quite got so bad here in Georgia. And that game atmosphere was completely deflated because of it. It's Missouri last week, which is the kind of game that's sort of like eating vegetables. It's good for you, but I don't know it was good. I don't know it was all that entertaining while it was going on. And, it's just this waiting game now of when is Georgia going to get to LSU in 2 weeks or however long that is? I guess 3 weeks. When is the Auburn game going to get here? When is the Alabama rematch in December going to get here? And there's a temptation to sort of wish away the entire season and get antsy about the things that Georgia's not quite doing as well yet. I get all of that. And I know that it's really hard to do this as a fan, and I'm speaking in the first person when I say that. But there is an element that the time that Georgia has between now and the big games that it plays is sort of useful time. Because as much as I've downplayed it, I mean, it is true that Georgia's breaking in a lot of new players, new guys in new roles. DeAndre Swift, in the mysterious first segment that many of you did not see, DeAndre Swift is in a new role as Georgia's kind of lead dog there at running back, sharing all that stuff with Brian Harrion and Elijah Holyfield and James Cook. And, DeAndre Walker, who we briefly mentioned, is in that new role as Georgia's kind of lead pass rusher. And a lot of other guys doing things they've never been asked to do as well. And right now, it is mostly good, but not exactly perfect for Georgia. And Georgia can win the national championship without being perfect. I mean, even national championship teams have some blemishes, some issues. But these are all appropriate steps. And I don't think that Georgia can afford to skip a step in this process right now. Whatever is gained and learned from Tennessee is useful when Georgia goes to LSU. The following week against Vanderbilt, probably better now than I realized at the beginning of the season. That's a useful next step as well. All of this experience, all of these moments as they build towards momentum. If Georgia really is going to get at the end of the season where we hope they're going to go, then these are important process to work. I love that phrase, kinks. Work those kinks out there along the way. And then one final thing before we get ready to say goodbye. Do pay close attention to that Stanford-Notre Dame game. I mentioned this briefly during the show a moment ago. If we're going to have the debate of can the SEC get two teams in the playoff again, the winner of Stanford-Notre Dame is going to have a big say in either that happens or it doesn't. I don't think the committee wants to leave the Pac-12 out of the playoff again after leaving them out a year ago. And obviously, an undefeated Notre Dame is just good for business, which makes them very hard to say no to. If you are, I said this before, get ready to buckle your chin strap for a pretty intense debate here. Whether it's Alabama as the second SEC team or Georgia as the second SEC team, there's a belief here that two SEC teams ought to make the college football playoff. Stanford, Notre Dame, the winner of that game, comes out of Saturday in a pretty strong position to say, not so fast, my friend. That should be a really fun argument to have, frankly, and I can't wait to be a part of it with you here on DawgNation Daily. Love to see you tomorrow afternoon for our Kroger kickoff from the side where the dog walk will take place there at the Tate Student Center. Then after the game in the UJ bookstore for our Northside Hospital Sports Medicine post-game show. And a whole lot of fun stuff happening around Athens tomorrow. If you see me, please say hello. I'd love to shake your hand and say thanks for your support of DawgNation, and we'll talk a little football there as well. I'll see you back here on Monday for DawgNation Daily Live, presented by Marco's Pizza. Hope you all have a great weekend.